From my hometown, memories of phrase. From my
Bloods, Crips, Mexican Mafia, 18th Street Gang. These are all names that you may have heard before, but do you actually know what they are? A gang is a group formed originally through spontaneity and is assimilated through conflict and crime. When initially formed, a gang's typical purpose is for protection and unification, though through time have created some of the most menacing criminals in society. Some people may see the 1920s as a lost generation that didn't have any major effect on society, though there is one lasting effect that shows no sign of dissipating anytime soon. That was the introduction of gangs. Even though gangs have evolved and changed in many ways, many have been around for multiple decades. The original gangs started off working the streets, doing what could be seen as petty crime compared to the gangs of modern day. The majority of gangs start off as means of protection against the crime of the city. The gangs of the 20s and 30s were not territorial. Their main purpose was to get money and did that with theft, prostitution, and forgery. The gangs of the 40s also participated in gambling as a way to get quick cash. With the 50s beginning, there came a new type of gang called car clubs. These were all extremely territorial and violent groups. If caught on another gang's turf, you would fight to the death. By the early 60s, car gangs almost ceased to exist. The 60s did show the introduction of one of the most violent and notorious gangs in history, the Crips. It started off as a small gang with two members, Raymond Washington and Stanley Tookie Williams, who attended Fremont High School in LA. As the Crips grew, many other gangs began to incorporate the Crip name, though these newer groups featured independent leadership. Many of the newer gangs began to form rivalries, becoming more and more violent. These gangs turned into what the original Crips sought protection against. With the start of the 70s, more gangs began to surface, one of them being the notorious Bloods, a rival gang of the Crips. By the 1980s, there were more than 30,000 members in the Bloods and Crips in the LA area. Some of the members were as young as 14, and most members were not older than 24. Since then, gangs have spread all across America. The Crips and the Bloods occupy around 123 cities across 33 states in the US, and have even formed some alliances with some East Coast gangs. Though not as widely publicized, prison gangs are extremely common. In fact, close to 80% of prisoners end up joining a prison gang, even if they weren't previously part of a gang. The most common trait that is present in street gangs and prison gangs is their main goal, which is protection. In prison, safety is a huge risk, and the chance of being hurt or killed while in prison is higher than if you were on the streets. Prison gangs really began to surface during the 1980s. Previous to that, they were not as popular, but were present in the prison systems. Now gang activity is the biggest problem that prisons face. In a street gang, if a member is convicted and sent to prison, they do not keep any ties with the street gang that they were previously a part of. Even if they weren't part of a gang outside of prison, they tend to still end up joining a gang. The idea in prison is that you were black before you were a Crip, Mexican before the MS-13. So if you want protection in prison, you go with the people of your same race. If released, a member will typically go back to the street gang they were a part of, though sometimes members cut gang ties altogether.
When I grew up, you gotta understand, I'm 47 years of age. So when I grew up, I was the second generation that came in after gangs had started. I was the generation that came in after the Black Panther Party was on a decline, and gangs was on the rise. So coming up, I found myself by the time I was in junior high school, about maybe 12, 13, 14 up in there, that's when I had to make a decision as if I was going to join the gang or be a part of the gang or what direction I wanted to go in. And because I became a victim gang violence that deterred me from even taking part.
Mm-hmm.
And my refuge was then found in going to school and playing sports, in which I excelled in all of that.
Okay.
Well, it wasn't hard because it was a part of the interior of the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Where I lived at was surrounded by gangs. Plus,
Yeah.
the neighborhood itself I grew up in it had its own gang as well.
Mm-hmm.
For me, once I became a victim of gang violence, I then started looking in other directions that would keep me away from it. I
Yeah.
really developed a hatred for it and those that took part in it.
Yeah. Okay.
On the age of the person, normally that's what happens.
Yeah.
You're still tied in, vice versa. If you
Yeah.
were in the prison gang, before you went to prison, you were in a street gang, then you went to prison, you automatically link up to to the as far as a racial standpoint. But when you go back out, they tie back into the gang in which they came from, but then they go with the purpose or the intent to unify the gang and say, hey, while I was incarcerated, this is what transpired. We were no longer enemies with this fraction or this fraction or this fraction, so we need to push a line on strengthening the alliances or what have you while you're out on the street. But it has a lot to do with the person's age.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a youngster that come in and do 2 or 3 years, 9 times out of 10, he's going to go back out there, align himself with the gang and indulge in the same bullshit activity.
Yeah.
But if that same individual went in and did like 10 years flat, he would come out with a different attitude, a different mentality around.
Okay.
Well, the main purpose is unification, to make the race stronger, to make the clique stronger, to make that particular branch stronger. It's strength in numbers. It's always strength in numbers.
Yeah.
And when you are in prison, the stakes are a little bit higher. And what I mean by that is your life. Your life is the loss of your life is more at stake. So you need to unify yourself, or at least identify with individuals in gangs. A case in point, one of the things that, although when I was incarcerated, I wasn't a part of a gang or what have you, I was a part of a think tank. But what as it was taught to me is, it's like, hey, look, you got to understand something. You were black before you were a gang member, if in fact you were a gang member at all.
Yeah.
So here, it's all about blackness. The same thing with Caucasian, same things with Hispanic. It's you were a Caucasian before or Hispanic before you were a gang member. So the alliance is to start building on that fact alone.
Okay.